During my stay at a mental hospital, a threat always loomed over me. The hospital I was in was primarily known for one thing, someone you may have heard about: ECT, or electroconvulsive therapy, a procedure where they purposely induce seizures in the brain to help manage a whole slew of mental symptoms. It is also a procedure where the patient undergoes horrendous torture and has their livelihood and ability to make art taken away. My psychosis-ridden brain cannot pick between these two truths. Is why I keep getting told it's a safe procedure, it can work wonders. I've also seen people after each session. Even before going to the hospital, the one reason I didn't want to go is because I always thought they would forcefully strap me down and shock me against my will. It's still even a deterrent and make me want to go back. Simply put, it terrifies me. So you can imagine my horror when someone brings up lobotomy. I want to go over this masterpiece of analog horror piece by piece. However, I also want you to support the project itself, so let's strike a deal. You will either click off this video now, go in the description of it and click on Alice in Dreams, watch the whole thing and then come back, or you can continue watching this video and then go support the original work by going, watching, and preferably giving it a thumbs up. But you have to promise you'll watch either way. Okay? Okay. Alice in Dreams starts with a gaping hole, staring up into a hopeful sky from a hellish underground. This perfectly reminds me of mental illness on a broad spectrum, but today I want to focus on the truly bizarre, and something that I unfortunately suffer from: psychosis. To stare up at the sky can indeed be hopeful, but it can also be meant to represent releasing your mind into the bizarre. Living with psychotic disorder, to me at least, means constantly living on the edge. Unless you're going through a full-blown psychotic break, psychosis often requires a balancing act on the world's thinnest rope. So easy is it to fall off and listen to the voices and thoughts in your head, the ones that tell you the government is spying on you or that you should end your own life. I hear the radio talk to me, and if I actually listened to what it had to say, I would no longer be on this earth. It's as simple as that. And yet, existence with this disorder is so hard. Sometimes I think it would be easier to just let go of whatever sanity I have left and let the thoughts consume me, as much as my misery pertains to keeping them away. This, to me, is the sky Alice looks up at, this release of sanity. But I will remain, and I won't let those thoughts overwhelm me. I've never considered hurting anyone, but I have thought about knocking on neighbors' doors at 3 in the morning during my rapid cycling manic episodes. Dear viewer, I don't want to scare anyone. In the next shot, we finally see Alice, although she is in a blurry land. Unsure exactly where she is. We hear peace and serenity in the forest, but it almost seems hollow, empty. We cut to Alice, looking down the rabbit hole. She's unsure of what lies below. It is the unknown personified, a realm where dreams walk and people fly. And yet, it is ultimately underground. It is not a safe place, perhaps an allegory for psychosis itself. As I said earlier, it's tempting to go down the rabbit hole, to completely lose yourself in delusion, to finally let go. I I said that was what the sky represented, but it seems much more clear to me now this is what the literal rabbit hole is, as Alice traditionally went down in the original story. But don't worry, we'll be getting into that version of the text and its possible connection to psychosis itself in a later section. We get more of the classical interpretation as Alice ultimately decides to travel down the rabbit hole. Or was it a choice? I know I've been talking about the choice to let the delusion take over, but that's not entirely accurate. Even when not in a full-blown psychotic break, the thoughts can still take over. Sure, I can choose whether or not to end my life because the radio told me I'm a horrible person and that I deserve to die, but that's just one of many choices that spawned from that phenomenon. I have no choice in believing the delusion, the voice. I discussed this whole radio thing in my video, The Horror Masterpiece That Convinced Me to Live, and I got an interesting comment on that video. Why do you listen to it? The worst part of psychosis to me is the confusion. As I've previously discussed on the channel, it's primarily a thought disorder. Sure, you have hallucinations, and they can tell you to do stuff, and sure, you're presented with delusional thoughts, but the most cruel part is that you cannot separate reality from fiction. You literally cannot tell what's real, and the things you stick to and decide are real are presumably chosen at random. That is to say, you don't truly have a choice. For me, I can try to rationalize with myself and think, now Alex, why would the radio want to talk to you and only you specifically? And on the outside, I can call it ridiculous, but for being completely honest here, it's just because you haven't heard what it says. That's why it sounds crazy. When I flip from station to station and glean bits and pieces of what makes me so horrible, hidden messages in each song excerpt and ad, well, it simply makes more sense to me that the radio is speaking to me, or some higher being is trying to communicate just to me through it. It can't be a coincidence. It's the same with the number 27. Sure, you can tell me inanimate objects aren't real, they aren't alive. That's just because you haven't heard their screams in your head. Because I'm special. I was chosen as a mediator between people and object. So that's presumably why only I hear them. See how deep this well goes? This, friends, is the rabbit hole. Something I have no real choice but to dive deeper and deeper in. As Alice takes off her rat mask, we have to wonder where she will end up. Never mind the haunting sound design and inherently creepy art direction, the suspense lies in her curiosity. How deep will she go into this rabbit hole? What happened next? Well, it genuinely shook me to my core. And since I already showed you at the beginning of the video, I won't bother playing it again. A lobotomy. One of the most horrific excuses for treatment ever conceived. I can't imagine the pain and suffering these people had to go through. It honestly terrifies me to even talk or even think about it. Because if I were born less than 70 or so years before I was, that would be me. That would have been me. And dear viewer, I cannot begin to describe to you how that makes me feel. Sure, I talked about ECT in the cold open of this video, and that still horrifies me, but it is absolutely nothing on lobotomies. To be tortured and, in most cases, have your entire livelihood taken away just for being sick. Because you had a disease that wasn't your fault, that you had no control over. It makes me sick to my stomach. Hell, you didn't even have to be sick, as disobedient women and gay men got them all the time. I'll go over this more extensively in a later section, one that I've already written, but I just want to say it here first. I hate the term crazy because it is simply a label placed on people, real people, that others just don't understand. And to use that as justification to lock them up for life, to expose them in horrific abuse and living conditions, to lobotomize them, well, it's beyond cruel. Just so they can live within society. What a fucking joke. Mental health care has a long way to go. But I think it's also important to recognize just how far we've come in most places in the world. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And while I'm still scared of judgment of ECT on my own medications, I can at least rest a bit easy knowing I won't get a sharp object literally inserted into my eye to pierce inside parts of my brain. God, just writing that sentence has made the nausea return. Joseph Acid. Brilliant, unparalleled violinist. Schizophrenic. Deemed insane. Lobotomy. Died from complications shortly before his 27th birthday. 27. It all comes back to that. What happens after the lobotomy is what I can only describe as a horrific fever dream. As this bizarre spectacle goes on, Alice can do nothing but gleefully clap along, which in my interpretation is the result of the lobotomy. Walter Freeman, the main architect behind what we know as the ice pick lobotomy, or the simplification from a sleep-induced medical procedure from neurosurgeons to a quick and affordable standard procedure of a medical instrument through the eyelid, coined the term surgically induced childhood. This essentially means that these patients reverted back to a mental state of children. As it is very well recorded that the after effects of the lobotomy were, amongst many other complications, the reduction of intellect and emotional expressiveness. AKA, they were basically children again. Of course, he understood this and stood in many procedures as he was a horrible man, but I digress. A quote from Wikipedia. He described one 29-year-old woman as being, following lobotomy, a smiling, lazy, and satisfactory patient with the personality of an oyster, who cannot remember Freeman's name and endlessly poured coffee from an empty pot. When her parents had difficulty dealing with her behavior, Freeman advised a system of rewards, ice cream, and punishment, smack. You get the point here. I think this is exactly what is going on. Then there's this nightmare fuel. She is waking up from her dream, rising from the rabbit hole, although certainly not in good terms. I am not falling into a void. Why do I have to take these pills? I am not crazy. I am not crazy. And yet, society tells you that you are. That you lose all agency over your life because you are crazy. And while I'm certainly not against people having to take medication or even being forcibly institutionalized for their own safety or others, dear God, what they had to endure at the time the story takes place is beyond imagination. Beyond a nightmare. We are not crazy. We can live productive lives, have fulfilling jobs, families, and kids. We are allowed to have agency over our own lives. Because we are people. It's as simple as that. We then meet a cat and a strange caterpillar man. The bizarre continues, except now we are trapped within the dream. Forever. Unable to escape, unable to scream out. Nobody is coming to help us. Nobody is coming to save us. We are left to the silly whims of doctors who pretend to have our best interests at heart, to pretend they want to hear the music that we play. But they've lost the right to say that. Once you torture someone, you don't get to say that it's for the patient's benefit. No. Fuck that. And now we see what's inside. Deprived of all human rights, this poor girl has had her brain, her very mind and soul torn apart. Her very face and identity removed for no reason other than she was sick and needed help. She needed help. And this is what was done to her. And for the most haunting scene of the video, this. The confirmation of it all, that she was in fact lobotomized, now laying in a cold, sterile room with no colors, no vibrancy to life, a soul lost to a cruel procedure. Another soul lost just because the medical professionals didn't care enough to try to understand. I feel sick. Okay, now for some lighterish stuff, let's talk about the original story. I won't take too long of your time, but instead will point you in the direction of 𝐄𝐯𝐞𝐫's paper entitled Alice's Wonderland, a psychological analysis. In the paper, the author breaks down normal from abnormal behavior and uses behavioral analysis to see whether or not Alice is schizophrenic. From what I read, it's a fascinating paper, and Alice's acceptance of what reality is, no matter how bizarre, makes me believe she indeed suffers from psychosis, and that lens in which we may analyze the story is certainly a very solid one. Can we talk? Just you and me? As I said earlier, I hate the term crazy. I was just having a conversation with a friend who described someone as crazy and had to point out that virtually every time we label people as crazy because there is something or someone we simply do not understand. Perhaps I'm a bit biased here as a sufferer of psychosis, but I just gotta get this one off my chest. I've heard about people, professionals even, doing inhumane things in individuals just because the latter were considered crazy. I somewhat understand the justification behind it, that these people are potentially dangerous to themselves or others, so they don't get to have rights. But that doesn't always hold up. At the very least, that is not a reason to completely dehumanize a person. As I said, I'm not against forcibly admitting someone to a mental institution. I met many people during my stay that ultimately benefited from that, but if you're going to do that, you have to send them somewhere where they will actually get treated. There's an infamous mental hospital in the city where I live. I've heard nothing but horror stories from it, and while the patients can get a little rowdy, I ultimately place the blame on the state itself. In the US in 2023, can you guess the police budget for the nation as a whole? I won't tell you to leave a comment with your guess, because that would be a corny way of engagement farming on a very serious topic, so just take a guess in your head. $100 billion annually. And while the assumed budget for mental health services in the US more than doubles that, it's a much bigger range than what you may expect. There's two areas I specifically want to look at, but I couldn't quite find the suitable data for them, so I'll have to approximate my estimations here. If you desire, take it with a little more than a grain of salt, but I still think it's important to look at. The population of my city, Buffalo, New York, baby, is about 886,000. That includes the entire metro area, including the closely residing suburbs. And yet I can only find two, I repeat two, mental hospitals during all my past research. I've had other results, but I don't think they're even legitimate, or at least not on a wide enough scale to be considered an actual hospital. The game Outlast is actually even based on one of the older hospitals here that has since become a tourist site. To my limited estimations, we have two options here. One is private that does not have an emergency room. That's the one I voluntarily stayed at. I had to wait 4 crucial days to get in. Yeller does have an emergency room. In fact, I believe it's the biggest hospital in the city overall, and it just happens to have a psych ward. It's a nice hospital overall, but has an infamously scarring psych unit. This is where most people go, as most just don't have 4 days to wait in the middle of a crisis. And I've heard many first-hand accounts of people that stayed there. This isn't just some spoopy urban legend based on diseases the general populace simply doesn't understand. These are real experiences, which comprise of CPAP, which is essentially waiting in a huge right room filled with about 10 beds and 40 to 50 patients. Normally, the actual unit itself is so filled up that people wait in this glorified waiting room for up to 5 or so days, watching people spider walk up to them and doing other non-YouTube friendly things. You can put the pieces together. There is no privacy, and the people there, mind you, people in desperate need, are treated as if they weren't human. Once you actually get into the psych ward, you continue to be treated as a nuisance. Now, I don't necessarily blame the staff for this. It is always upper management that is chiefly responsible for how any company or unit goes. The staff are probably too exhausted to even think, let alone empathize, because the ward is just too busy. My solution, which is an obvious one, is to reallocate funds to build more hospitals. Then continue to fund them so they have the proper staff and resources in order to help those who desperately need it. Mind-blowing. My second problem with the government when this video became an issue with officials I have no idea is, why do police handle every case? Sure, they have some services for mental health crises, and sure, I do believe some police officers should be there just in case things get dangerous, but oftentimes a room full of just officers escalates an already very tense situation and can bring out the worst in the person in actual need. What I think we need is to have several designated people, like literally only trained to handle these types of situations, and that be their only job, so they can de-escalate things. Then have a few general officers in there for backup. But of course, that probably won't happen, because we can't trust these suffering individuals. Because, dear viewer, they're crazy. And, as always, thank you for watching.